All right, so let's get started. And Logan, if you don't mind continuing to let people in as they sign in, that would be great. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization's Transit Working Group. My name is Sandy Johnston, and I am a planner with the staff to the MPO, and I manage this working group. So we're just going to get started here a little bit. I'm going to read a couple of notices, and then we will get started with our program. So here's our notice of non-discrimination here at the MPO. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. Next slide, please. This meeting, excuse me, this is our accessibility statement. This meeting is compliant to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Logan Casey of MPO staff at lcasey@ctps.org or 857-702-3706. I also want to remind everyone that you will have seen a notice when you came in, but this meeting is being recorded and we will be posting it to the MPO's YouTube page later. With that, I would like to turn things over to Tegan Teig, our Executive Director, to kick us off.
Hey there, and welcome everybody. It is good to see you, and welcome to this Transit Working Group meeting, which is hosted by us, by the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, also known as the Boston Region MPO. And as Sandy said, I'm Tegan Teig, I'm the Executive Director. And in case there are any attendees to this event that are newer to the MPO, I'd like to say a few words about what we do at the start. But for those of you who are already familiar with us and already know who we are, welcome back. And for everybody who's joined us, while I talk, please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you could please write in the chat your name, your affiliation if you have one, and then where you or your transit service is located. So some kind of geography. So please use the chat function so that we know the range of folks who are here. So for just a little bit of an introduction to the MPO, we approve, or the MPO itself and the board approves the allocation of all federal transportation dollars in the Boston region, which is made up itself of 97 cities and towns. The board to the MPO includes representatives from municipalities, subregions, state agencies, regional agencies, and including the MBTA and groups that include and engage with other regional transit providers. And so as staff to the Boston Region MPO, we enable the board in its decision-making around allocating those federal funds or approving the allocation of federal funds. But we also provide planning and technical work in support of the region's goals to create a sustainable, healthy, equitable, robust, and economically viable transportation system, of which transit is absolutely central. So if you want to learn more about what we do, please visit our frequently asked questions page on our website, and that link should show up in the chat. So we as staff, we work with quite a few partners in the region and work to provide forums to convene relevant folks to discuss really important transportation topics like this. And this particular forum is the Transit Working Group, and it's intended to support coordination between transit providers and to build connections between all of you, as well as with the MPO itself. So as always, I'm incredibly excited for a conversation today. I will be here for most of the conversation. Apologies if I'll drop off and have to come back. But I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our guest speakers, and I'd like to thank them for being here. That includes Siobhan Cunningham, Paul Swartz, and Ryan Mahoney from the Transit Ops team, and then Dr. Marco Kitty, as well as the MPO staff that are contributing to today's meeting and speaking throughout the meeting. So thank you all for being here and for joining us at this forum. And then I will turn it back to Sandy Johnston, who's our facilitator for the meeting, and he'll say a bit more about why we're here and the agenda for today. Sandy?
All right, thank you, Tegan. I am just going to go through some guidelines for the meeting. So Logan, if we can advance the slides. Again, my name is Sandy Johnston, and I'm a transportation planner with the staff to the MPO, where, among other things, I manage this wonderful transit working group. So just looking at the introduction, seems like we have a great mix of folks, including representatives from transit agencies, other transit operators, municipalities, and other sectors. I really appreciate everyone being here today, whether you've attended previous meetings or if this is your first time. So my colleague Logan Casey will be co-hosting the meeting with me. You may have noticed that you joined the meeting on mute. Please do not unmute yourself unless we call on you. We will clearly designate times for comment and questions, and you can always comment in the chat. If you haven't already, please rename yourself with your first and last name, a comma, and then your affiliation. We do encourage you to use the chat box to submit questions and comments. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this either by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand at the bottom, or in the reactions button in the toolbar, depending on your version of Zoom. We will then call on participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you run into any technical difficulties during the meeting, you can contact Logan via the chat box, lcasey@ctps.org, or 857-702-3706. If you would like closed captioning, you can turn that on under live captioning in the control menu at the bottom of the page. You may need to click on the 3 dots that say more. This is also repeated on the slide what I just said verbally. A few other details about how we're going to run this meeting. In general, we will be prioritizing comments and questions from transit providers and their representatives during most portions of the meeting, although we will try to get to everyone as time allows. We do have some time reserved for general public comment toward the end of the meeting. The chat will be open, and we'll periodically check for questions and comments there as we go through the sections of the meeting. You may see links mentioned in the various presentations, and we'll be dropping them in the chat as we were able. We will also include them in a post-meeting email. As I mentioned earlier, the meeting is being recorded, and the video will be available on the Boston MPO YouTube page after the meeting. You can find recordings of our previous transit working group meetings and some of our coffee chats on that YouTube page as well. All right, are there any logistical questions at this point in time? Great. So seeing none, let's advance to the agenda. Just give a quick rundown of that. First, we'll have a quick variety of updates on MPO-related matters that we thought might be of interest to this group. Second, there's an opportunity for transit providers to bring up what they're working on and what they think others should know about or what you'd like to know. And then we have 2 guest presentations, as you heard from Tegan, that I'm very excited about. The first is from the team at Transit Ops, who are developing transit technology and bringing it to the rest of the transit world in an open source form. And the second is from my friend, Dr. Marco Kitty, a transit scholar based in Montreal, but originally from Italy, who will help us further our discussion of regionalization by talking through how Montreal has reached regional fare policy integration. And then finally, there will be some time for general public comments and some information about how we will be following up after the meeting. There is a written agenda on the MPO meeting calendar, which I will put up there in the link. I will put a link to in the chat in a moment. All right, next slide, please. So now that we're done with the preliminaries, let's jump right into the updates we have from MPO staff. We have quick updates on several different items. Since we're a little bit time constrained today, I'd like to encourage you to follow up with my colleagues offline if you have any questions. First, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan Church, who is our manager of MPO activities, also my supervisor. So Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Sandy. Today we will be talking about, could you advance to the next slide, Logan? I'll be briefly talking about our upcoming federal MPO certification review, which will be occurring next Wednesday and Thursday for the on-site meeting. Next slide, please. During that process, the certification review, we will be asked some key questions from the federal partners at Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration. And some of the outreach questions that they've proposed are, what are your views on the planning process? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing? What are some of those strengths? Do we feel that that we understand how the planning process works and how can people get involved? And do we feel that there's adequate opportunities to participate and be heard? And those are some of the questions they've asked at the public meetings. We had a public meeting held on September 14th. Next slide, please, Logan. For the MPO's federal certification public meetings. It was held at the RTEC meeting last Wednesday at 2:30, where those questions were asked of the public, and the federal partners did receive some good feedback. We will be having a second meeting on October 6th during the MPO's regular session beginning at 10 a.m., which any of all of you are invited to attend for that public meeting to provide any feedback on the MPO's process. The meeting that we will be having next week over next Wednesday and Thursday will be the on-site review of specific MPO topics that the federal partners would like more information about from staff. Next slide, please. So if there are any written comments for that could be submitted through October 14th, and those can be directed to Cassie Ostrander at the Federal Highway Administration, as well as Leah Sermon at the Federal Transit Administration. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Sandy, to go on to the next topic.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. So I am going to pinch hit here for my colleague, Michelle Scott, who manages our long-range transportation plan, and just give a brief overview of what that is and what the schedule is for the development of the MPO's next long-range transportation plan, which we're calling Destination 2050. Next slide, please, Logan. So the long-range transportation plan, or LRTP, is the long-range plan that provides a vision and goals for the Boston region's transportation system over the next 25 or more years. It prioritizes major projects and programs to meet that vision and shapes the MPO's decisions about projects and studies to fund. It's updated every 4 years, so we are due for an update. And the current LRTP is called Destination 2040. That was adopted in 2019. And so we're going to be going to Destination 2050 with this new update. Next slide, please. So in terms of the schedule, right now, we are in a period of identifying regional transportation needs and refreshing the MPO's vision and goals, and identifying or updating investment programs and candidate projects. And all of those things will be happening now, fall of 2022 through winter of 23. Then we'll be moving to a phase where we'll be allocating funds to investment programs and selecting actual projects from spring of 2023 into the summer. And then we expect final adoption of the Destination 2050 plan in the summer of 2023. During the phase that we're in now of identifying needs, we can use feedback from transit working group members and events when identifying transit-related needs, and you'll hear a little bit at the end of the meeting about a future event that we are going to be hosting around that. Next slide, please. All right, so you can follow the Destination 2050 process at our dedicated webpage for it, which I am going to put in the chat. All right, and you can also contact Michelle Scott at mscott, M-S-C-O-T-T, at ctps.org. You should keep your ears open for opportunities to provide input into the MPO's updated vision and goals, and information about other upcoming LRTP activities, both in the near term. One more slide, please, Logan. Finally, just wanted to mention a process that's going on in parallel to the development of the MPO's next long-range plan, which is this Massachusetts Department of Transportation is developing their own statewide long-range plan, which they're calling Beyond Mobility. There is a survey, and again, I'll put the link in the chat to that for that going on right now, and we encourage everybody to help fill that out. With that, I will hand things over to our Unified Planning Work Program UPWP Manager, Srilekha Murthy, to talk a little bit about that program.
Thank you, Sandy, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Srilekha Murthy. I'm the Unified Planning Work Program Manager with the staff of the Boston Region MPO. And I'm just going to take a couple minutes to share some updates on the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP. Next slide, please. So the MPO released the UPWP for public comment on July 21st, 2022, and it was endorsed by the MPO on August 18th, 2022. This year, the UPWP programmed about $8 million across the MPO's core certification requirements, such as the UPWP itself, the Transportation Improvement Program, and the Long Range Transportation Plan, among other core programs, as well as technical analyses, corridor studies, and discrete studies. Discrete studies in particular are one-year studies focusing on specific areas of need, and we develop these studies based on input from the public, partner agencies, and sub-regional groups, among other stakeholders. Next slide, please. This year, the discrete studies list includes a new multimodal mobility infrastructure program, which provides a permanent budget line for recurring corridor studies and complete streets work. And the discrete studies are as follows: updating the bicycle and pedestrian count database, flexible fixed route bus service, the transit modernization program, a lab and municipal parking study, learning from roadway pricing experiences, and sustainability and decarbonization in the freight and logistics sector in the North Suffolk area. Next slide, please. So looking ahead to next year, we're beginning sub-regional outreach in October. Additionally, we will be developing a set of guidelines for study submissions, and those will be circulated in the coming months. In the interim, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments. An email is on the screen, and I'll drop it in the chat as well. But please feel free to reach out as well. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Leica. All right, and we'll drop our emails in the chat there if you just give me 1 second. And Leica, you can go ahead and drop your own email in there. So the next item is to create space in the agenda for transit providers and transportation agencies to make any announcements that you would like to share with the group beyond the main topics of today's meeting. If you have anything you would like to share, please raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can put it in the chat. All right, seeing none, we also welcome comments throughout the meeting. But we will move on now to the main event. I am very excited to welcome here today the team from Transit Ops, the CEO, Siobhan Cunningham, CTO, Paul Swartz, and COO, Ryan Mahoney. While I'm far from a tech guru myself, I've been very happy to have an ongoing dialogue with this group over the last couple of months, and I think you'll find what they have to say very interesting. All three have spent time working for the MBTA and developing both internal and external facing tech tools, and they're now applying that experience in a mission-driven way to try to support the rest of the transit world. We'll have about 20 minutes for their presentation, followed by 10 minutes for Q&A. So feel free to take it away, folks. Siobhan, you are muted.
Thank you. Yes. Next slide. So thank you very much, Sandy and the MPO team, for hosting us. We're very excited to have this audience today and talk about what we're trying to do and how we think it can help agencies move forward their customer information platforms. So as Sandy indicated, Ryan, Paul, and I are met each other and started working in the customer technology department at the MBTA that was started as a result of the snow apocalypse in 2015 and the inability of the T to tell people where vehicles were and what was happening. And so the mandate was make that better, make it a lot better. And so as a result, the approach was, if we can get the existing vendors to improve the capabilities, start there first. But where that isn't possible, we built tools integrated into the existing tech stack, and we built tools out of whole cloth to solve the problems of getting accurate information to riders. Next slide. So the data pipeline. Once the team started going in there and recognizing all the complexity of getting accurate information out and what it takes to both enable operations to update what's happening on the ground and get that out to the API that Apple and Google and Transit all consume and give notifications to riders. We went and built a open source model that and to be clear about open source, it is, there is a GitHub, and I will point to where on the website you can go and look at this, that anybody can use if you have access to developers, but it is a, basically a tool build that allows anyone who wants to use it for their transit agency. There is obviously contextual accommodation you have to do for your agency, but it is available for you to use and build upon without having to get a license. And I'm going to stop there for just a moment to, the picture of the team and the timeline and the data pipeline. Oh, great. And Ryan linked the supported apps. Next slide, please. And so what have we built? There is sort of in the world of transit, the vehicles, the routes, whether or not they are on their routes, where they are, and against a schedule, right? And getting that information out on screens and apps is how you tell people on the ground, here's what you can expect. And then the website also has uses Trip Planner in order to allow people to plan trips, and then integrated fares information so that they can see what their trips will cost. Next slide, please. So who are we, what are we doing, and why do we exist? As we are building this, and we started getting calls from other agencies who wanted help. And as a result of being on grants for the MBTA, we could not find a way to provide that support. And so the three of us got together and said, how do we do this so that it can be used by other agencies, but is not, that is the best way possible. And so we formed the nonprofit Transit Ops org with the goal of making this available, providing support to transit agencies that are interested, making certain that people understand what it is, how it works, and how they can use it, and where to start, as well as being able to, so for example, our integration for the buses is with Trapeze, but a lot of people use Clever Devices. So if a plugin needed to be built to Clever Devices, being willing to do that development to help an agency that was using Clever Devices get that information into the API. Next slide.
Siobhan, I'll add that sometimes when we say our, we mean MBTA, but yeah, a lot of the code is currently in a state where it supports the current state of MBTA. But as we work with other agencies, we're adapting that to be more vendor agnostic.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. And where and how. So all of our applications are built to run on the cloud with the idea that you should be able to deploy it there, maintain the security, and that running it in a well-managed way is very, very, very affordable. Next slide, please. Supported apps. So these are, and I can talk through, like in the questions, people, whatever ones are more compelling, but I will sort of give the very high level overview of what we've built. So Skate is essentially a web-based app for field dispatchers. So people who are out in the field and need to know how to either manage buses or tell people where to go. It allows it allows operations people to see where the vehicles are, what what issues are happening, and communicate as needed. Screens, this is a huge problem in many places where both advertising and directed screens are not able to consolidate prediction information, alerts, and other sort of like planned disruptions. And so Screens is a tool set that allows you to integrate that CMS into existing information portals. Then LAMP. This is a data, I don't know, Paul, are we calling it a data lake?
Data platform.
Data platform for analyzing performance and holding history and being able to do what are we doing, how well are we doing, etc. Alerts Concierge is what it sounds like. This is the ability for people to get notifications that that their planned ride. So like you go in and say, I commute on the Orange Line, and then you will get an email that the Orange Line is being shut down for a month. And here are the ways to get around that decision. The big two that really have made a difference are the combination of API and Concentrate. And this is the tool set that allows you to consolidate information from multiple modes and present it out to third-party applications in a very high performant way with low operating cost. And I'm going to let Paul do Delta and Tablespoon.
Sure. So yeah, Delta and Tablespoon are, Delta is an application for kind of feeds into LAMP around keeping track of your historic data. So, historically, where have your vehicles been, what real-time data you're providing, and what your schedules have been in the past. And it will automatically keep track of all of those things so that you can feed it into other kinds of analysis going forward. And Tablespoon is responsible for signal priority. So giving buses and other vehicles priority at intersections to help maintain on-time performance. Back to you, Siobhan, for the last two.
All right, thank you. Elevator hotline. So we recognized that the current solution, and I don't actually remember the name, what they had in there for telling people that elevators was not working was Byzantine, and people were getting lost and calls are being dropped. And so using cloud-based text-to-speech technology, data workflow that allows you to have people put in, the information that's relevant and get the alert for the stations that they care about. And it's much faster and easier to use for people who are calling in and need that information. And then the transit clock is the original code base that Swiftly now also uses for predictions, but it has branched off and is being used for Minnesota for its predictions, and it is the open source prediction engine that is quite powerful and excellent in accuracy. Next slide. Okay, right, sorry. So this is Skate. This is just sort of the visual to understand what's in there and the information that we are providing to field dispatchers. So this has, the operator, the route, what run they're in, when they're supposed to go off. I don't think we go through the other things, but there's a lot of deep information about operations here that you can access and be able to both, again, communicate to people who are at a hub and communicate to dispatch about what's going on. Like, this bus just got disabled, please take it out, and that we can remove it from predictions and get it marked out. And one of the big goals here was to minimize the ghost bus problem and make certain that when buses were not going to run, that we update the predictions to show that that bus is not coming. Next slide. And this is a sample of the pipeline. And like I said, we have Vonta's Transit Master, but that CAD AVL can be any application that is telling you your vehicle locations. And we combine it with Samsara, which is giving more frequent GPS locations. We normalize that data in Busloc. The Swiftly is providing predictions. Concentrate merges it into a GTFS real-time feed, which then goes to Skate, but also goes out to third-party apps. Next slide. So that's a very quick overview of some of the tools and capabilities that we have and that we're interested in more people taking advantage of, since it has been built and it exists and it is available. And so we are interested in people's questions. As you know, if people want to understand the pros and cons of an open source approach, or the tools, or what it would mean for their organization, we would love to talk to you.
All right. Well, any questions for the transit ops team? Just wait a minute. All right, we have a question in the chat from Judy. She says, I recognize that some of these apps are not customer facing, but how do you ensure accessibility and usability by diverse customers?
Is that question about the customer facing ones, or is that a question also about the operations facing ones?
Judy, feel free to speak up to answer Siobhan's clarification, but I imagine that it is relevant to both, primarily the customer facing, but you may well have folks who have disabilities working in the on staff too.
Yes, so there all right, there's a lot of accessibility and disability work on the front end. So for example, the one of the projects that CTD did was redo the design and style guides for the website so that it's bit accessibility. So the contrasts are work for people who are colorblind. It is expandable, and it all has the alt text so that if you're reading a reader, using a reader, you can have it read out to you, as well as the navigation is analyzed for that. That is also true for the alerts when you're going through it, that they are set up to be readable by speech readers. And then for the screens work, there was actually a tremendous amount of work done into the design. And I mean, I wish I sort of had the diagram of it, but it basically, like, where are you, like, if you're in a wheelchair versus if you're standing versus if you're like whatever, like how far away, how big the text has to be so that it is usefully readable. And then there's other stuff as far as what the audio goes, but for in the field, like for example, the e-inks, the assumption is that you're getting that read to you by your phone if your visibility declined, but the contrast and stuff and everything and the language that is used is all checked for accessibility, non-English speakers, etc. So it was a sort of long-winded answer, but I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, Siobhan, I wonder if I could add, so I totally agree. So like a broad range of like usability testing had been applied to applications that have user interfaces. I also think that because the tools tend to adhere to existing standards, and like, for example, by publishing GTFS, you're taking a kind of system agnostic approach to getting that information to riders. So, if it's accessible applications that other vendors have created, you're still making that information more accessible to a population that maybe is able to use Google Maps or Transit app or other like more specialized transit data applications.
Is there a text message alerts based tool for ghost buses confirming a bus isn't? I'm not certain I understand that question.
So let me just read it so that everybody can hear. And thank you, Judy, for that excellent question. So Christopher asks in the chat, is there a text message alert based tool for ghost buses or confirming a scheduled bus isn't a ghost bus? And I Christopher, feel free to clarify if I'm misreading this, but I think what he's getting at is if it's known to supervisors that a particular run is going to be a ghost bus, it's not going to happen. Is there a way to put out texts or other pop-up alerts so that even if it can't be eliminated from the feed, that people will have an idea of that it's not actually there?
So the application that this would be most pertinent to for us is Skate, the one that was showed, and I think probably that's what helped to prompt this question. That application has built into it a bunch of different notices and visualizations for the user population, which are, I guess, bus dispatchers primarily who are using that. As far as I understand, Paul, feel free to correct me, but they then have other mechanisms with which to communicate internally in the T or with riders. But I think it was Skate's app and visualizations that made it a lot more easy to detect when this was happening.
Yes, and I will the other part of that is alerts concierge. So if the bus dispatchers can say that there's a ghost bus because they can see it on Skate, or an operator calls in saying they're not going to make their shift, and they can then create an alert in the system, the alerts concierge can notify anyone who has that bus route that a particular trip isn't going to be run. The other part is that Concentrate can then update the real-time information to indicate that that bus is not going to run, and that'll show up in real-time feeds like Google and transit apps. So if you're watching a bus on a map and they say that this run isn't going to happen, you'll be able to see either, you know, that scheduled time crossed out or some other kind of user interface indication that that trip isn't going to happen.
The question also kind of brings up a really cool feature that's been discussed a lot, which is like, are there circumstances that you can detect by, you know, interpreting sensor data or schedule data, real-time data, and then automatically generate an alert so that a person doesn't have to intervene, or even automatically close certain alerts when you can detect that the situation has been resolved. You know, we've thought a lot about that, but currently a lot of the systems are intended to sort of bring information to a person who can make a decision if it warrants an alert, and then alerts would be manually created.
All right, so Dan asks in the chat, do you have a way to show detours where the route is changed? I assume this is mainly for customer facing also.
I know there is, but I think, Paul, it is not done for like a short-term detour, right? It is when the detour is going to exist for some period of time because it updates the website and everything else, right?
Yeah, there's definitely work in progress to support this, both in kind of the open standards that we were talking about, like GTFS real-time, and then the apps that generate that. But there isn't a good kind of open way of doing that at the moment, unfortunately. But it's definitely a work in progress.
There's an app that we don't have any information on our website about that we're sort of actively planning and developing called Fates. And this is like kind of like a smaller application to make it easier for smaller agencies to publish GTFS feeds that would then get picked up by maps and things like that. And this is probably an interesting use case that we might consider in there, because it seems like on the small scale, it could be easy, you know, if we could make it easy to change the data and publish it, it could be possible.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's something that's also influenced by internal agency procedures. You know, before I lived in Boston, or well, before I lived in Boston, I lived in Chicago, and there, even for relatively minor diversions, the CTA would go out and actually place signs at each stop if a bus was being diverted, even just for a weekend, and do a lot of other things that I haven't seen other places. And that, you know, you need good data flowing in from the agency side to enable to run it through the apps also. All right, we have a few more minutes for questions for this crew, if anybody has any. All right, well, seeing no more questions here, I'm sure that Siobhan and crew would be happy to have you contact them by email or social media if you have any further questions. But thank you, this has been fascinating, much appreciated. Very glad to have you. And I guess we'll move on to our next speaker. All right, so that was great. I'm really happy to introduce my friend Marco Chitti, originally from Italy. Marco completed his PhD in urban planning at the University of Montreal in 2021, where he wrote a dissertation about the international transfer of knowledge in the planning field. He's currently teaching courses in Montreal and serving as a postdoctoral fellow with the Transit Cost Project out of the Marin Institute at New York University, where he wrote what I will personally test as an incredibly thorough case study of how Italy keeps transit construction costs much lower than English-speaking countries. He's also a licensed architect. And today he's going to talk to us about how the Montreal region accomplished fare integration to accompany the opening of a new transit system. As with the last presentation, we'll have about 20 minutes for the presentation, followed by 10 minutes for question and answer. So Marco, take it away.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for the invitation. So already Sandy introduced me, so there is no need for further introduction. So I will just go into the presentation. Next slide, please. So the structure is very easy. So I will just make some quick facts about the transit in Montreal, how it works now. About fare integration at a glance. So the new fare integrated system that came into existence last July. So how would this happen? Which kind of reforms and governance reform were needed to come to this point? How it works right now, and what are the limits and challenges of the way it was implemented through these last years? Next slide, please. And next again, this is the title. So just about like Montreal, Greater Montreal is a 4.3 million inhabitants metro area. Transit to Berkshire, it's around 22.5% of the last census, so around like between 1/4 and 1/5 of people commute using transit. So that results in some 570 million trip per year. And so the average trip, as you see, many Canadian metros is far higher than what you can observe in most of the rest of North America, excluding maybe some metro area on the Northeast, including Boston. And the landscape is about like mainly 6 main transit operators right now. So you have STM, that is the operator within the island for the subway and the bus system. So the island of Montreal. Then you have 2 major mostly bus operators on the South Shore, on Longueuil and RTL, and on Laval, that is the big suburbs on the north, that is STL. Then you have EXO that operates commuter trains and suburban buses. And the newcomers, that is the REM, that is the new regional express metro that is now under construction, will open later this year. Next slide, please. So the way the system is organized is very important for how fare integration came about. So mainly you have a subway, so the blue line, the metro, that covers with 4 lines the island, the heart of the island, the core of the island, and with 2 little extensions into the northern suburbs of Laval and south to Longueuil. Then you have commuter trains that have been developed starting in the 80s by reactivating old lines that existed before. And they are like the typical suburban commuter train that have like very peak-oriented one, except the Deux Montagnes line that is now part of the 3rd element, that is the ROM, that using some former existing right-of-way commuter trains and new right-of-ways is being developed as a new like express, fast and frequent regional metro. So very high frequencies and spanning from 5 to 1 a.m. in operation. And then we have the bus system that is like the feeding system. So mainly it's organized with for local transit within Montreal, Laval and Longueuil, but there is a wider system that operates mostly as a feeder to the metro. So a terminus, large terminus for the metro. And for a few areas, you have like a downtown terminus where you have a lot of these commuter buses that start from the suburb with 1 seat ride now brings you downtown, which you have many examples in North America around. But this is about to change. And this is why this fare integration was very important. So can you go to the next slide, please? And next slide again. So what is the essence of this new fare integrated system? So I can say, so it's always make a claim and what's the first one, it's always like dangerous because you can be disproved. But the thing is really the first very full integrated, so all modes are integrated within the system and all operators in a large metro area in North America, which has multiple operators. So starting last July, it took like 2 steps. The first step was in July 2021. The final step was in July 2021. It's a fare mode that is based on zone. So the metro area and surrounding linked areas are divided in 3+1 fare area. And it's, can we go to the next slide, please? So you can say it's really mode neutral and operator neutral. What does it mean? For example, this sample trip that is from the westernmost part of the island to downtown, like 2 campuses of McGill University. Normally, you can either take the bus plus the subway within the same fare because it's operated by STM, so flat fare with free transfer of 3.25 before, or you could take the exo train that has a different fare structure and you'd pay like separate fare for the train and the bus for the single fare. Then there were already integrated fares for passes, like monthly passes, but it's much more expensive. Something you're very familiar with in Boston with different fares between the commuter trains and the rest of the sub. Now, since July, we have an almost zone A fare that is 3.5, and you can take whatever you want. It's a free transfer between all modes existing and a coming era mode that will take. So you can have a trip that involves taking the suburban train, then transfer it to a metro, then transfer again to a bus, and then taking the ROM. It will remain within the same fare if you stay within the same area. Next slide, please. So how did this thing came about? So I just skipping very quickly through, but this is just single fare, but there are like separate all area fare or 2 areas fare, A, B, C, depending like weekly passes, weekend passes, daily passes, monthly passes and yearly passes, different fares for students. So it's a bit more complex than this, but I'm giving just example with a single fare because it's easier. So the pre-existing background, as I already told you, there are 3 main operators that operates buses essentially, or the metro for the STM, and they are mostly municipally. Okay, I can slow down a bit. Thank you. So it's mostly municipally owned or owned by what is called the agglomeration. So we have like just groups of municipalities that have shared governance over some stuff, some issues like transit. So we have the STM for the island, the RTL, as I say, for Longueuil, and the STL for Laval. Then this is a bit more complex. I oversimplified the thing because it changed so many times over the period, but we had a lot of like local operators because that operated local buses or commuter buses that comes from outer suburbs into the city. And over time, the development of the suburban network that was reactivated in phases from the 80s to the very last one is the Mascouche line in 2016. So, and this was operated for a long time by the AMT, so Agence Métropolitaine des Transports. That was an agency that set up in the 90s to manage this, but also to do all the planning, some of what you will be doing here at MPO, for example. So it was both an operator and planning and coordination authority. The fares were set by own agency. So its own agency had its own fare, mostly flat fares within the area covered by G agency, with some specific fares for situation like AMT buses that fed into the subway. So you had like a transfer fare for this kind of particular situation. So this was quite chaotic. There were something like 450 different fares that could be applied across the metro area. You understand it's quite a babel of fares. So that's, can we have the next slide, please? The reform takes several steps. So there was first a general reform of the governance of the metro area. In 2001, there was the establishment of the Communauté Métropolitaine de Montréal. So it's a regional authority which the council of the authority, the governance of the authority is made by the mayors and representatives from cities that are part of the metro area. And the mayor of Montreal is the head of also the metro area. And has some main task about like urban and regional planning for both development and transfer. And for example, there is a general master plan for the metro area that mandates minimum threshold of development for TODs, like areas around main transit. So you cannot build under a certain threshold of density on these areas. But the big step toward the fair reform was the establishment in 2016 of the Autorité Régionale de Transport Métropolitain. So it's a regional transportation authority, which is dependent from the CMM. The CMM nominates the boards of the RTM, but they have some kind of independency. But the main missions that were established by the provincial law. So just to understand, like laws, provinces in Quebec are all powerful, and they have most of the powers regarding transit and more than what states can do in the US. So I don't know exactly what are the differences between, but they have a lot of power on setting, the general institutional framework. So the RTM is tasked with the long-term planning for transit development. They have to produce a plan to say what we will build and how we will expand transit in the next 10, 15 years. The thing is the separation of service planning from operations. So the RTM is kind of inherited the planning part of the AMT, but the operation part of the suburban buses and trains was transferred to a new agency called EXO. That now it's just a simple operator. So, and one very important thing is that centralization of revenues and contract-based allocation of operation to transit providers. So I will go into more detail about this, but all fare collection and all kind of sources are centralized to the ARTM. Something that kind of accelerated the process that was already in discussion for several years is the development in 2016 of the ROM, Réseau Express Métropolitain. Next slide, please. Why this? Because as you see, so in gray, you have the subway that mostly cover the center of the island with some spurs, but there is this new system of 67 kilometers that will span across from the southern shore to the northern shore to the east of the island, going through downtown and connecting to the subway. That essentially, next slide, please, will kind of change completely how the bus network works. For example, from these pink areas that you see, or orange areas, let's say colored areas you see in this map, are what is called area of non-competition. It means that all the bus services in these areas that used to go downtown or to other terminals with express buses, often from like suburban buses stopping in many areas in the suburbs and then rushing to downtown, will just feed into the ROM, this new suburban metro, regional metro, if you want to call it like this. So this means that these people will have to take two different operators, like the local bus operator and the ROM, which is developed under a private, public-private partnership with the province pension fund. So this implies that people will be forced to take different modes, and this is a good practice, like using the rail as a backbone and having buses doing the job of local feeding and local trips. So this is how things were rushed through, because without fare integration, it will create another layer of fares within the area and adding a lot of cost for and hassle for users. Next slide, please. And so this, for example, the first one, the first section of the RM will enter service later this year and will be on the southern shore. So before you had, as you see in the circle on the left, you had a lot of buses. You see all the little rounds, there's like dozens of access buses reaching a downtown terminal at the central station. Now, after that, all the buses in the southern shore will be either feeding onto the RAM or to the metro in Longueuil, into big, huge bus terminals. And then people will change and use this very frequent train that will come every 2.5 minutes at rush hour. So this is how it will be organized. So fares has to take into account this new pattern of service. Next slide, please. Again, next. So the governance is really, as I told you, the province has really set the legal framework and give the strategic orientation, like the missions of every body. So the CMM is the political orientation and control of the RTM. So the board of mayors decide how much money will they allocate, how they will be allocated across the metro area, what will be the policies of implementing new projects in the future, in coordination with the province and the federal the province especially, that will bear most of the cost, and the federal government that will come up with especially capital funds. The RTM has the task of planning, funding, and organizing and promoting transfer, and also doing stuff like setting fares, of course, and for example, wayfinding, making wayfinding projects, or developing the new app for the whole metro area. And for example, general planning. For example, they allocate the amount of service in terms of revenue kilometers of bus in a given area, and then decide which routes will be frequent and so on, in coordination with transit agencies. And transit agencies more become operators and maintainers. So they are much more into the planning of actual operation. Next slide, please. So the thing is really, it really works somehow like what we can call regional transit districts in many parts of Europe, with some differences, like what we have in Germany with the Berkshire, or things like Île-de-France Mobilité, or what we call Basin Authority in Italy. So there is a centralized collection of revenue. For example, the RTM collects all the revenues from fares, not directly, because the system actually, all the machine, etc., are still owned and operated by the different agencies, but all the money is transferred up to the RTM. And they collect all the municipal, provincial, direct and indirect subsidies, and all the kind of money they get from, for example, value capture schemes around ROM stations and other source of fundings. They do the overall planning, and including setting fares, and the RTM provides money to operators to operate on a base of service agreements or service contracts main year. The RM is a bit different, so I will skip it because it's very complex, but if you want some more information, because it's a very bizarre PPP scheme, but they are paid based on revenue kilometers. So it's what we can call a gross cost contract model. So they don't take the risk for ridership. The operators is the RTM that takes the risk for ridership, so revenue from fares. And operation planning, so the day-by-day operation of how to manage buses and the subway and so on, still within transit agencies' control. Next, please. So what are the main shortcomings of how this thing came about? So one big issue is really a problem of path dependency from the pre-existing fare structure and operation. For example, we have an example here. So since fares zones are very big, they are very, very big. Like the Montreal Island span some 40 kilometers, 45 from one side to the other. And this is still within area A. And it's because it's divided by rivers from the rest. So B area, it's also the two B areas of Laval and Longueuil are quite big. And the C, it's the rest of a metro area. D are like outer municipalities linked to the metro area. So the increase between the different fares is very steep. Like from single fare 350s area A, two areas A, B becomes suddenly 5.25. It's like almost $2, 1.75 more. And you see also for monthly passes, there is a big step. And also the geography, following the geography of the former operators, because zone A is still mostly the area covered by STM, so the island. Area B is area covered by the RTL, and area B on the other side is the same operator. So it's still very much didn't change so much. On one side is understandable because they didn't want to change fares too much, because as you know, fare is one of the most politically tricky things to change. But for example, you have very odd situation, as you see in this image, that if you get from this island and across zone A and C, so you have direct contact between two zones that are 3 zones apart, and this is not a very good practice in fares. You have like a double fare just for a few kilometers. So you will have like people driving to the station just behind the fare zone to get like a half fare. Or for example, because of this thing of having Longueuil being another area because it's across the river, even if it's really adjacent to downtown, you still have to pay the full 2-area fare to get across the river for a couple of stations of the subway. Next slide, please. So, for example, a different approach that was taken in Milan, for example, the areas and zone increase is very much more discrete. So every few kilometers, you have another step. So it's concentric. So the geography helps in this case, but this is the same, like it's an operator and mode agnostic kind of fare. So you can take the subway, the suburban trains, the buses within a given set of areas. But for example, the base ticket is for 2 areas. These are very smart things that have been done in many places because at least you have a basic fare, but then you can have very much more discrete increase in fares, so just 40 euro cent in this case from area to area. So you do not penalize people for just making 1 more kilometer and adding a lot of cost on them. Next slide, please. So another example of winners and losers, and losers will always make more noise in the political arena because in this kind of reshuffle of transit fare. Here you have the Southern Shore terminus of Metro in Longueuil. As you see around, there are a lot of parkings. So until now, people could take either drive there, park for free their car, for the outer or very low fare their car, and then take a special fare of the subway, which is slightly more of the fare that existed before, just to take the subway from here and going downtown. But people getting there from bus already paid the double fare of RTL, like the Southern Shore operator, and the STM. Now with the fare reform, the people taking bus to the subway will gain because they will have a flat fare that allows them to use on both areas, like on the island and outside. But people that were driving, they will pay the same fare, which is much higher, like 5.25 instead of 3.75. So these people are not very happy, and you see this on the press a lot. So there's a lot of pressure for this, for changing this. Next slide, please. So there are also multiple challenges in the future. This is a very fresh reform and it's still very moving. It's a news of 3 days ago after I finished this presentation that the RTM has decided for the next 2 years to reduce the AB fare to 4.50, to have less, not instead of 5.75, to have a less abrupt increase between 2 areas. So they realized that this is a design mistake they did. The problem is really that with the decrease of fare revenues that we have experienced in the last 2 years because of COVID and working from home policies, as you see, like revenues from fares dropped from 900 millions to 450 around in the last 2 years. And this year, they hope to get back to 75 to 85% of pre-COVID ridership by the end of the year, based on actual trends. This is yet to be seen. So the lack of resources is something that really risks to threaten the whole architecture of the system. And unlike with other public agencies, the contract that they have with the CDPQ Infra for the development of the REM regional metro is not based on a gross cost contribution, but is based on a contribution of per passenger kilometer base of 72 cents. The estimated yearly cost can very much fluctuate between 430 millions for the low estimates to up to 600 millions per year that the RTM will have to pay to the CDPQ Infra. And this is also money that comes from operation funding that will go to fund also the capital cost, because the CDPQ Infra will recover the investment through this money that are paid by the RTM. So the RTM is not taking the ridership risk. So this is good for the COVID situation now, because it's CDPQ Infra that will take this risk. But in the future, if ridership is very high, the RTM can also end up paying much more, while with other operators, it's quite indifferent if ridership is higher or not. They will get the bulk of the risk, but they get also the higher revenues if there is more ridership. And then there is a lot of planned expansion now. It's a bit messy, but there was another planned ROM for the eastern part of the island, 30 kilometers of new subway, regional subway too. It's a bit kind of back to the drawing board, this project, but there is a lot of like necessity. There is a plan to increase peak hour share of transit to 35%. So there will need to be more money put into this, and fare integration has some cost. Because you are splitting money between more operators, and reducing fare for people means also like reducing revenues. So this is really unclear what's the path forward in the next 4 or 5 years for this system. I think there will be a lot of fine tuning in the coming years, because especially for financial issues and how the system has been designed. So I think I kind of wrapped up all the situation, the general terms of what is. So I think I'm over with the presentation. So if you have any question about something that I passed through very quickly or anything else, if I can answer, I will be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Did you want to go through your conclusion slide? Yeah.
Oh, do we have a conclusion slide?
Yes, you did.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's the thing.
You're doing fine on time. No worries on
Yes,
time.
so that's why I was skipping. Okay, the thing is really, it's really I think it's a major improvement for rider experience. There are always some resistance because, there are entrenched habits that are very hard to, to change, and people fear changes, and this is normal, but it's making much more easy to plan to go around. So for example, there is no premium for faster rail modes, and this is already very good. Another conclusion is really, it cannot happen for integration without a major restructuring of transit governance. So you have to have some kind of uploading of planning, funding, and far-setting powers from the municipal level that can be very fragmented to metropolitan level, whatever form this takes. In Montreal, it takes the form of the CMM and then the ARTM, but this needs to be done. It requires a strong governance at the metropolitan level. So there's been, the fare integration came after years and years where all the mayors slowly, most of them, let's say in the metro area, came to the conclusion that this was the path forward. So this is where things should go, and in long discussion with the provincial government, because this reform that started in 2016 has been discussed for many, many years before. So the understanding that the role of transit agencies can be narrowed down within this frame to one of pure service provider and third-party fare collectors under a gross cost contract arrangement. So there is less room for the agency to be the one leading on changes, and so there need to be much more coordination. And there have been a lot, at least in the press, the things have appeared, a lot of conflicts between where does the responsibility of the RTM about planning goes, and where does transit agencies one go. Like the RTM has been accused to be too much micromanagement, to do too much micromanagement over actual day-by-day planning. That should be the responsibility of operators. And importantly, the way you design zones, it's fundamental. It's very hard, I think, in most of North America, where you have large inner city areas with flat fares that is very wide, as you have in New York, to a certain extent in Boston, to then have something that have some kind of more discrete increases, because you cannot really increase fares on the fringes of your area that was a flat fare area. So you have to stick to this as your base fare and then having smaller increases. But it's really important how you design it to not create this kind of very unfair geographies of a fare that can really be very unfair at the same time and generate some kind of bad behavior, like people driving to the next boundary so they can get a lower fare. So I think this is the conclusion that I kind of skipped and forget to say.
All right, thank you so much, Marco. Very, very informative. Are there any questions for Marco? Again, feel free to put something in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. And Marco, if you could also put your contact information in the chat,
yeah.
that would be fantastic.
I will put my.
As a reminder, we'll also be posting this PowerPoint and a recording of the meeting on the Transit Working Group webpage at some point in the near future, in case you need more time to digest it. So we'll just, any questions? We give another minute. Marco, I think you direct messaged me with the chat. You should send it to everyone in meeting. All right, so we're going to move along. Logan, if we could go to the next slide, please. And thank you, Marco, again. Very,
Thank
very
you
interesting.
for having me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
So there's been a lot of information shared today, and it's important to us to also provide an opportunity for other attendees to share additional thoughts, impressions, or questions before we close out the meeting. If you'd like to speak, please use the raise hand function. We'll also check the chat for comments and questions. All right, running a bit ahead of schedule here. I don't see any questions or comments. Logan, if we could go to the next slide, please. First, I want to thank all of our speakers and my various colleagues who helped pull off this meeting, especially Logan, who has been running the Zoom and doing our admin work behind the scenes. Before we wrap up, I do want to mention what we'll be doing next as the NPO transitions into its new federal fiscal year. We'll continue to hold these big working group meetings roughly quarterly, so you can expect one in December or January. Between now and then, we'll also be holding more of our fun series of what we call coffee chats. These are informal virtual events centered on a particular theme or topic and capped at about 30 attendees. Well, we're taking the next month largely off because I'll be in and out of the office. Thank you, Jewish holidays. I am very happy to announce that we do have 2 upcoming coffee chats to announce, and there will be more to come. So the first is going to be called Launching and Marketing the Berkshire Flyer with a special guest, Eddie Sporn, who's a planner and business person who's been involved with the Berkshire Flyer effort out in Pittsfield. And that is going to be on November 1st at 4 p.m. I'm putting the link to that in the chat. And that's the Zoom registration link. All right. The second one is going to be focused on human services transportation. And we're going to be talking with my colleagues, Michelle Scott and Betsy Harvey, about the NPO's long-range transportation plan, which you heard about earlier, and its upcoming coordinated public transit human services transportation plan. And the registration link for that will be coming in the chat in a moment. That will be on November 16th at 4 p.m. And these will also be going out in an email after the meeting and going up on our webpage. So if you don't catch them now, don't worry about that at all. Also, I would just like to mention we're always open to new ideas and suggestions for topics for coffee chats. So please do reach out to me if you have any ideas. Next slide, please, Logan. Again, follow up. We'll be sending an email with rounding up all the links that have been shared today. The YouTube recording of this meeting will be posted on the NPO YouTube page, along with materials, and we will be sending out notices about future meetings. They may look a little bit different. We're going to be transitioning from just the Gmail list that I've been using to something coming from MailChimp. So do keep an eye out for that. Judy says that, November 1st is the Moving Together conference. Yes, excellent point. We will look at that. I think some of us are going to Moving Together from CTPS, but not all of us. So we may keep the date, or we may think about it now that you have pointed that out. Thank you, Judy. All right. Next slide, please, Logan. All right. Finally, if anybody has any questions, ideas, thoughts, my contact information is on the slide here. It's also S. Johnston, SJOHN, STON ctps.org or 857-702-3710. You should feel free to reach out anytime. So we're now 15 minutes ahead of time. Glad to return some time to you. Any final questions, thoughts? All right, well then, thank you everybody for coming out. Thank you to our presenters. Very interesting stuff as always, and have a great night.
Hi, thank you.